The desert stretched endlessly beneath a burning sky, a sea of gold and silence. On the highest dune stood a solitary figure, cloaked in the color of dust and dawn. Upon his arm rested a creature of untamed power, a falcon, sharp-eyed and restless, wings trembling against the horizon's heat. The man was known as the Falconer, not for owning the bird, but for understanding it. Between them existed a bond that was neither spoken nor forced. It was a connection forged through patience, discipline, and time, three things the modern world forgets too quickly. He stood motionless, the wind brushing against his face, his gaze fixed far beyond the visible world. To watch him was to witness a paradox, motionless yet alive, calm yet commanding. In that stillness lived strength, and in that silence lived wisdom. The falcon shifted on his gloved arm, feathers gleaming under the sunlight. It wanted to fly, to chase the invisible prey hidden in the distance. But the falconer did not release it yet. He waited, breathing in rhythm with the desert's pulse, feeling the invisible currents of the wind. Timing, he knew, was everything. Patience was not just a virtue, it was power. The falcon's sharp cry broke the silence, echoing through the dunes. It was not a cry of frustration, but of readiness. The man tilted his head slightly, listening to the unseen dialogue between instinct and control. He whispered to himself words he had lived by for years. The sky belongs to those who can wait for the right wind. And then, slowly, with grace and certainty, he extended his arm. The falcon spread its wings, and in a single heartbeat, it was gone. It cut through the sky like a thought, piercing confusion. It was freedom, precision, purpose. As the bird soared higher, the falconer did not chase it with his eyes. He closed them instead, trusting the bond, trusting the process, trusting the discipline that had taken years to master. He had trained himself not to depend on sight, but on sense. For what is mastery if it still relies on control? Real mastery, he knew, was the ability to let go and trust that what you've trained will return. Every day in the desert was the same, and yet never the same. Some days brought scorching heat, others a cool, merciful wind. The falconer never complained. He learned early that the world does not bend to our comfort. It bends to our commitment. He was not there for ease. He was there for purpose. He was there for purpose. In the world's silence, he had found his truth, that growth does not come from movement alone, but from stillness that gives movement meaning. People from distant villages had once asked him why he chose this life of isolation and patience. They could not understand why a man would spend his years watching the sky and speaking to a creature that could not speak back. He smiled at their questions and said, "Because the falcon teaches me what no man can, that freedom without discipline is chaos, and discipline without freedom is death." They did not understand, and that was fine. Understanding is not required for truth to exist. In the early days, before his hair turned silver and his eyes carried the weight of years, he was impatient. He had captured his first falcon and wanted to dominate it, to make it obey. But the bird would resist. Wild, defiant, proud. Every time he tightened his grip, it fought harder. Every time he tried to force it to return, it flew further away. Until one day, in his frustration, he sat in the sand and watched it disappear into the horizon. For hours he waited, ashamed, angry, and alone. And then, as the sun began to fall, he heard the faint rustle of wings. The falcon had returned, not because it was tamed, but because it trusted. That day he understood the lesson that shaped his entire life. You cannot command what you do not understand. You cannot control what you do not respect. He learned that the falcon was a mirror, a reflection of his own spirit. Its restlessness was his ambition. Its sharpness was his mind. Its flight was his freedom. But without patience, all of it turned into chaos. The more he learned about the bird, the more he learned about himself. He began to see that the true hunt was not for prey, but for clarity, not for victory, but for mastery. Every flight became a dialogue, every return a reminder that control is not about domination, it is about harmony. At night, when the desert cooled and the stars shimmered above the dunes, he would light a small fire. The falcon would rest beside him, feathers folded, eyes closed but alert. He would whisper to the flames, speaking as if the universe were listening. "The world is a sky," he would say softly. "Your thoughts are birds. Some fly straight, others scatter. But only those you train will return." It was his philosophy, his religion, his code. His wisdom was carved by silence, like a sculpture shaped slowly by unseen hands. He had once chased the noise of the world, fame, wealth, applause. He had once believed that being seen was the same as being strong. But life has a way of humbling those who chase shadows. He learned that the world's applause fades faster than echoes in the sand. What remains is the person you become when no one is watching. That is what makes a man unbreakable. Each morning he rose before the sun. His falcon slept, but he would already be awake, sharpening his mind like a blade. He practiced stillness, standing for long minutes without moving, training his breath to match the desert wind. Some would call it meditation, but to him it was preparation. The day would bring tests. Sudden winds shifting dunes, the falcon's moods, and he had to meet them with calm precision. To the falconer, life itself was a form of falconry. You train your instincts, you prepare for storms, and when the moment comes, you act without hesitation. He believed that life rewards those who can balance two opposing forces, control and surrender. Control gives structure, surrender gives freedom. Most people only learn one of the two. They either try to control everything and destroy their peace, or surrender too early and lose their purpose. The falconer learned both. When he held the falcon, he embodied control. When he released it, he practiced surrender. Between the two, he found harmony. And in that harmony, greatness. One evening, as he walked along the dunes, he found a young traveler sitting beside a broken wagon. The boy looked exhausted, his clothes torn, his eyes hollow. The falconer offered him water, and the boy, after drinking greedily, asked, "Why do you live here alone? Don't you get tired of the emptiness?" The falconer smiled faintly. "The desert is not empty," he replied. "It's full of lessons for those who know how to listen." The boy frowned. "But there's nothing here. No people, no noise, no life." The falconer pointed to the sky where his bird circled gracefully in the fading light. "Wait, there is life in silence and truth in stillness. You just have to stop running long enough to see it." The boy stayed with him for several days, curious about the art of falconry. He tried to imitate the falconer's calm, but quickly grew frustrated. "It doesn't listen to me," he cried when the bird refused to return. The falconer chuckled quietly. "Of course it doesn't. You're not speaking to it. You're shouting at it. You're trying to control it with fear instead of trust." The boy looked confused. "But how do I make it obey?" The falconer replied. "You don't make it obey. You earn its respect. Just like life, the more you try to force it, the more it escapes you. But when you align with it, it returns willingly." That night, under the stars, the falconer told him a truth few understood. The falcon is wild by nature. You can't erase that. You can only guide it. The same is true for your own spirit. You can't kill your impulses or emotions. They are part of you. But you can train them, just as I train my bird. The goal is not to silence the storm inside you, but to teach it when to roar. The boy nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the weight of the words. He would remember them years later when he faced his own trials. The falconer knew this. His lessons were not meant to be understood immediately. Wisdom, like a falcon, must circle before it lands. Days turned into weeks, and the falconer continued his quiet routine, training, observing, reflecting. Each day was a repetition, yet within that repetition, he found endless depth. That is the paradox of mastery. The deeper you go into the same act, the more it teaches you. The world chases variety, but wisdom hides in repetition. The blacksmith forges every day. The archer draws the same bow. The writer returns to the same blank page. Mastery is not about doing more things. It's about doing one thing until it reveals everything. The falconer's days were marked by rhythm, not chaos. The falcon would rise with the morning, soar under the sun, and return at dusk. The man would observe, train, and learn. Sometimes the bird would return with prey, sometimes with nothing. It didn't matter. Victory was not in the catch, it was in the return. Because every return meant the bond was still alive. Every return meant trust remained unbroken. When the falcon failed, the falconer did not scold it. He understood that failure was not disobedience, it was feedback. He would adjust the training, learn from the wind, and wait for another chance. The desert did not reward anger. It rewarded patience. Over time, the falconer began to realize that life itself was training him just as he trained his bird. Every hardship was a test, every delay a lesson, every silence a teacher. Years passed. His hair grew white, his back slightly bent, but his eyes, those eyes, remained sharp as ever. The falcon, too, grew older, slower perhaps, but wiser. Their bond had deepened into something sacred beyond words. The falconer often thought that when he died, his spirit would rise on the falcon's wings, carried into the endless horizon. He found peace in that thought. After all, life was never about ownership. It was about stewardship of one's craft, one's mind, one's spirit. The wind grew colder that year, the nights longer. The falconer sensed the end of a cycle approaching. He watched the falcon fly farther each day, lingering longer in the skies before returning. One evening it didn't return at all. He waited, through the night, through the following day, through the next. His heart was heavy, but not broken. He smiled faintly to himself and whispered, "So, you've chosen the sky." He felt no loss, only completion. The bird had not left him. It had fulfilled its purpose. It was meant to fly freely, just as he was meant to stand firmly. He sat by his small fire that night and thought about all the people he had met. The impatient ones, the restless ones, the dreamers who wanted success without stillness. He wished they could understand what the falcon had taught him, that you cannot rise above the storm until you learn to stand within it. That true power does not shout, it waits. And that freedom is not found in escape, but in understanding your boundaries deeply enough to transcend them. He whispered one last time to the stars, "May every soul find its sky. May every heart learn to wait for the wind." Years later, long after the falcon had flown beyond the horizon and the falconer's name had faded into the whispers of the dunes, a traveler crossed the same desert. The world had changed. Machines now roamed where caravans once moved, and noise filled the spaces where silence had once taught wisdom. Yet, even in this new age, the desert remained timeless. The traveler, weary from the road, sought shelter as the sun fell like burning gold into the sand. That night, beside a half-buried ruin, he discovered a small stone carved with a symbol, a falcon in flight, wings stretched toward the sky. Below it were 4 simple words, "Wait for the wind." The traveler smiled, not knowing why, and decided to stay the night. As he slept, he dreamt of a man standing on a dune with a bird upon his arm. The man said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any voice. The next morning, the traveler awoke before dawn. A gust of wind brushed against his face, and something within him stirred. A memory that wasn't his. He climbed a nearby ridge, stood tall, and breathed in the quiet. For the first time, he did not rush. He did not chase. He simply waited, and as the first light touched the horizon, he felt what the falconer must have felt: peace, strength, and direction. In that moment, he realized that the lessons of the falconer were not about training birds or conquering deserts. They were about mastering oneself. The wildness within, the noise of the world, the impatience that drives so many to exhaustion. The falconer had discovered what few ever understand, that true power is not found in motion, but in alignment. That life, like the falcon, cannot be forced into obedience. It must be guided with respect and when the traveler descended the dune, his steps were slower, but his heart was lighter. He carried no burden, yet he felt full of meaning, full of calm, full of purpose. Years passed again. The traveler became a teacher, known not for loud words, but for quiet conviction. When his students grew restless, demanding quick answers and fast victories, he would smile and tell them the story of a man who waited for the wind. He would say, "There was once a falconer who learned that life cannot be commanded, only understood. He learned that stillness is not weakness, and that patience is not delay. He taught that to lead anything, a bird, a dream, or a life, you must first learn to lead yourself." And though they rarely understood it at first, those words stayed with them. Because in every soul there is a falcon, restless, hungry for the sky. Some try to cage it, others let it run wild. But a few, a rare few, learn the art of the falconer, to balance freedom with focus, to let go at the right time, and to trust that what is truly yours will always return. As for the falconer, his story became legend. Some said he was just a man. Others believed he was something greater, a spirit of the desert, a guardian of wisdom. But the truth was simpler. He was neither saint nor myth. He was a human being who discovered what most never will, that the strength of a man is measured not by what he controls, but by what he can release. That real mastery is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with calm in the presence of it. And that silence, when filled with purpose, can move mountains louder than thunder ever could. In the final chapter of his life, long before he vanished into the dunes, the falconer had written a single line in his journal, the only words he ever left behind. "May every seeker learn that the sky is not conquered by wings, but by patience." When the traveler, now old and gray, read those words for the first time, he felt the truth settle deep within him. He stood outside, looking up at the endless sky, the same sky that had watched over the falconer, and whispered, "I understand now." He stretched out his arm as if to release an invisible bird, and in that gesture he too became part of the story. Because the legacy of the falconer was never about the bird that flew away. It was about the human being who learned to let it go. So,